Hello, everybody. This is Cristina Santamaria Graf, and you're here with Edu Spirit. And I wanted to introduce you to a very dear friend of mine who I'm thrilled to have here with me. Megan Farnsworth is an associate professor of special education at Southern Oregon University. She earned her PhD at the University of Arizona in 2010 in multicultural special education and has taught in K-12 schools in California, Oregon, Arizona, and Hawaii for 11 years, and post-secondary institutions for 9 years. Dr. Farnsworth possesses a strong commitment to teach, serve, and collaborate with culturally diverse families and students who experience exceptionalities, and is currently exploring ways grief affects teaching and learning. Megan has recently begun using story in her teaching, which is a universal tool to build connection and trust. One premise that manifests through story is trusting in the connection between that which is seen and unseen transforms fear into love. As a holistic educator, Megan utilizes the tools of narrative and breath to explore the human condition. And with that, I just want to begin our conversation. We had the opportunity to touch base, a couple days ago about different themes that we wanted to explore, and a few things came up, and I think I want to begin with this whole idea, Megan, if you don't mind, about exploring authenticity and what authenticity means, particularly in public spaces.
Okay, great. Well, hello.
Hi.
I'm so happy to be here. I feel very honored to be here with you, Cristina.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have this theme that has reappeared throughout my life this past year. I'm sure in other years as well. But I know in our teacher education department, we really focus on authenticity and being honest and, just that word authentic. And I think we stress that off a lot with our student teachers, and really made me think about what does authentic mean, and especially in public spaces. Because I think what happens in public spaces is that there are so many forces that come together, right? You have your own heart, your own head, your own spirit, and your own desire to communicate, but then you have others. You have other people, you have institutional ideologies, you have, or wherever that public space is, right? And so there's these different energies merging, and you are somewhat in control, or maybe I should say sometimes, I know what my message is, but I can't guarantee or control the way that it is interpreted or going to land on how it's going to land. And I recently read about, was reminded about the Buddha using the term right speech. And it really set me in motion about being able to use that term in public spaces, that it's observing that it is a public space and that it's necessary to respect that public space, in that there are very many different perspectives and histories and energies that already exist there, and from other people that you just don't have control over, you don't know. So the idea of, yes, being authentic is important, but also coming with the right speech of no harm to others, and that the way that I am speaking is authentic, but it's also out of kindness and of respect.
Right. And I think along those lines too, we were just talking about how difficult it is when we're thinking about being in a public space, in a public venue, to be true to ourselves, mm-hmm. and what we believe in, what our heart is speaking, and at the same time knowing that those spaces within us are private and they're personal and they're deeply sacred. And when you make the decision to put yourself out there publicly, sometimes it feels disingenuous or not authentic when we have to put filters around some of those ways that we're feeling in a way, to protect that sacredness within. And for me, and I think we talked about this the other day, is like, where do you find the fine line? Like, where is the ground where you can, in a public space, share and be vulnerable and safe, and at the same time ensuring that you're protecting parts of you that you wouldn't necessarily share with just anybody. And so it's all like a give and take, a process of give and take. And doing this type of work where we're in front of a camera and we're talking about who we are, and we do this in front of our students as well, sharing our stories, which I think we're going to talk about in a little bit. I think we'll, in a way, talk about rewriting stories and talking about stories as a way of healing. When we bring that into our classroom, how are we also at the same time ensuring that we're not revealing so much of ourselves that we feel disempowered? You know, a story should make you feel empowered, not the opposite. And so it's a constant negotiation. And I thought it was lovely that we had the opportunity to really talk about that as teacher educators, and how we begin to think about those spaces.
Yes, I agree. And I am grateful that we have this space right here that is a public space, but that we can actually step outside of it and talk about our thoughts about it. So thank you.
So along those lines, you recently had an amazing adventure, like a trip that you took, and which maybe you'll bring that in a little bit. But within your journey, you've had this kind of, I would say, epiphany or revelation of like how rewriting stories and story itself is a way to really, as you put it, explore your wounds and your vulnerability, and to bring healing to some areas that may have been kind of entrenched a little bit in darkness, and really illuminating those spaces and understanding better who you are through bringing yourself and sharing yourself through story. So I wanted you to, if you wouldn't mind, talking a little bit about that journey and kind of what you've been exploring.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I wanted to start with a quote from this book. It's called A Buddhist Grief Observed. It's by Guy Newland. However, he is quoting somebody. He is quoting the Zen master Robert Aitken. And so this is the quote. Woodpecker asked, "Do you think I could be a teacher?" Raven looked her over. "What's the dark side?" Woodpecker hesitated. "I'm not sure there is one." Raven turned away, saying, "Then how can you be a teacher?" And that just really stuck with me very strongly, because as a holistic educator, I believe that there is room for it all, that the whole really means the whole. Every part of us is important, valid, and equal. The reason I start with this is because it is a story, and I think that story is very magical. It is just like the first quote that you read about, that story brings the seen and the unseen together, but we need to trust that we need to trust what is happening in the story, believe it, and then be able to apply it to ourselves. And that's the magic of story, is that it actually brings the teaching a little bit away from ourselves, from both the storyteller and the listener. So it's this magic space in between, and a lot can happen in that space. That space is very creative because it is a little bit impersonal, although we know that we are applying it to ourselves. And so that's kind of a gift. It's a gift. It's a third space. It's a hybrid space of that story just creates in people. So, and the other reason, again, why I brought this, why this spoke to me so well, was because the idea that the woodpecker knows that in order to be a teacher, that you really do need to understand the whole. And the whole includes all shades of color. So often we use metaphors of, morality, good and bad, with dark and light. And so Woodpecker knows that darkness is part of the whole. And so I recently returned from Bali, which I used to live in 25 years ago. And one aspect of Balinese Hinduism is they really believe that dark and light coexist together, and that we need to acknowledge both of them, and that there is not one that overpowers the other. There's not just some big transcendence that the light always wins. That it's an equal balance. That if we acknowledge both and learn to balance, that then we are in balance. And so that was really important to me. I have had a tragedy. I lost my son almost 5 years ago. And so for that amount of time, I have been exploring the darkness and learning to acknowledge both the dark and the light, and how to hold them both and with equal value. And that's been an incredible journey. I went back to Indonesia, where my son was born, and I really faced that part of my grief, and was able to use some mindfulness techniques of the breath and really slowing things down. And I think that's just such a gift of breath, is if you can, and mindfulness, if you can really slow things down and observe. In this case, I was observing myself in that space as a pregnant woman, and with the birth of my son, and using breath as a tool for that observation. So again, that that mindfulness creates a space of observation. And that in that space is where I was able to rewrite the story of my son's birth, which was fairly traumatic. And so I just feel so blessed that I had also gone to Thailand in the same trip and had some mindfulness training at a Buddhist school. So the timing was perfect for me, that I was able to apply some of this technique to my actual journey. And that was such a gift. So that's what I am currently looking at writing about.
So I want to just unpack some of the things that you just beautifully discussed, because I think some of the things that you're talking about, some of these tools, are going to be very helpful. So there's a couple things that came up as you were talking that I wanted you to explore a little more. The first is, if you could describe a little bit more why it was important for you to rewrite the birth of your son, mm-hmm. and how that rewriting elicited, and you're still processing this. So one of the outcomes of this so far, thus far, mm-hmm. It was a feeling of release, but also maybe some healing too, and how it's manifesting now may be different how it manifests in a year, in a week. Mm-hmm. But right now, where are you at with that? So why was it important for you mm-hmm. to go back and rewrite that story?
Well, that's a really good question. I just knew with the passing of my son, I just knew that I needed to embrace his full story and really learn to appreciate his soul, his spirit, and celebrate it. I just knew that. And we could keep asking why, but I don't know why. It was just an internal drive. I just knew that as a mother, to really, instead of focus on the loss and the focus on his absence, which also, of course, occurred, but there was the human soul is so amazing. There is such a drive for survival, even with the mind. If the mind doesn't want to follow, the soul knows that it needs to survive and create. And so there was some kind of push of celebrate Keita. My son's name is Keita, you know, to really fully embrace him and celebrate him. And so when I thought about ways to do that, I went back to his origins, which he was conceived in, and I was pregnant in, and he was born in the island of Bali. And so that was just a natural place to start this celebration of him. And at that time, during his birth, that whole time of conception through birth, it was a pretty tough time for me. I was 21, and I faced several obstacles. And so when I went back to, again, celebrate Keita's birth, I thought, you know, I need to really look at these obstacles, or this story that I had created, or me and the universe had co-created, and Keita and all the other energies, and really examine that story. And is that really what happened? You know, after many years, I think, or even minutes, the mind is so powerful that I think we can change stories, or start believing different parts of stories, or, you know, I just needed to go back and examine, is that truly what happened? Is that serving me? Is that celebrating Keita? So I just went back to examine that story, and what happened was that I did need to rewrite it, because it was you know, part of the dark, and honor it as well, but being able to transmute it, being able to move it to, how is it serving me? How is it serving Keita? How can we all move forward from this?
Thank you. Thank you. I remember you had said too something to the effect of how some stories no longer serve us, and how rewriting a story can kind of release the old way of perceiving of a circumstance that maybe we're tired of. We're maybe tired of some of the emotion that particular memory or circumstance elicits again and again and again, like a loop. And so by rewriting it, it's all like a release, to me, it feels like freedom. Like there's through that space, through that new rewriting, there's a release. And I'm like seeing in my mind's eye, like a bird just being, like a space being open, and a bird just starting out, because it's been stuck in this one way, in this little space, and it's confining. And then all of a sudden we rewrite the story, and that spirit can be released. And I think that's a very powerful modality of healing, you know, that you beautifully described.
Well, and I also think it had to do with something about reclaiming power, because, you know, when something happens that is deeply, deeply tragic, I know that I really grappled with how much of this was under my control, how much could have been prevented, how much is fate, you know, really looking at power, reasons, right? The mind wants to understand it. And so, you know, when we explore different cultural identities and cultural belief systems, a lot of them are about fate, supernatural, you know, what is beyond your control, and what do you as a human being have control over. And so that was another thing that I really, not necessarily at the time knew I was exploring, but when I got there and started the process, realizing that I did have power to rewrite the stories. And that was a really big aha to me, that I didn't have to stay suffering with this certain story that had been recreated for 25 years.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I know that those words and your journey will resonate with a lot of people. Then the last thing I wanted to just kind of have you, maybe we can end with this, is and this is for everyone, educators, teachers, whoever is interested in really practicing mindfulness and using breath as a tool, that really allows us to kind of slow down and kind of be in that present moment. We were talking about how, well, as mothers, as educators, just as people, we're constantly, if we're in a moment, it's so hard to remember to be there in the present, because we're thinking about other people's schedules, and we're thinking about getting the kids here or there. For me, like getting the girls to school, and what do I need to pack for lunch, or what do I need to start getting ready for dinner? I'm thinking of the future. I'm thinking something that happened a few days ago, like, oh, I should really take care of that. And it's so hard, like right in the right now, to just kind of stop myself and stop my mind chatter, and to be really grateful for breath and this moment and being with you right now, like all these things, because we're thinking in our mind. And so I wanted to know, and I think this would be a wonderful way to kind of bring it to a close, is if you could just kind of provide us with some of the actual steps that maybe you went through that could maybe be helpful for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Well, sure, I can try. I am not endorsing any certain specific technique, because I know everybody responds differently. But really, how the process began, because I didn't go to Thailand and get the meditation, the mindfulness training until halfway through my trip. So the beginning of my trip really was, I was an observer. I was traveling by myself. And so I stopped engaging with social media and, just observed. And that's what I noticed, was that when I slowed down, am not distracted, that I could pay attention to my breath, and that they actually together, being an observer, other people, helped observe myself. So it became a practice of, oh, here's somebody walking towards me, they're wearing this blank blank, like just slowly observing someone, and then being able to mindfully observe myself. I'm sitting upright like this. Oh, maybe I should sit a certain way. Oh, if I adjust this way, I can get a deeper breath. Oh, wow, this actually feels good. I can breathe deeper, and oh, maybe I need to unbutton my pants. I mean, make yourself comfortable. That's what that comment was.
Right.
And so that dedication to saying, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to pay attention, so however that happens for you. But then when I attended the mindfulness training, it really was focused on the exhale and noticing the breath right at your nostril. So, and of course that's your mind, because really we can't feel the air at our nostril. It's not they call it a subtle sensation, right? It's not a gross sensation where you just are doing something and then say, oh, there's a breath at my nostril, I better breathe in. So it's really your mind focusing on the edge of your nostril. Oh, there it is. And so that initial breath in is what really slows you down. And then being able to hold it for a few seconds, and then slowly blowing it out with your mouth. And so the inhale should be shorter than the exhale. So however that works for you. Usually I breathe in for 4 seconds, hold it for 2, and then blow it out for 5 seconds. And so I don't know if that recipe would work for you, but that seemed to work for me to really slow everything down. And then observe your thoughts, right? As they're coming in, you just go right back to your air, right back to your intake, wherever you left off or wherever you are. And notice that you trailed off, or, oh, I'm thinking of this. Oh, my belly is full of air right now. So in a way, being able to observe what is actually going on. But it does take a commitment, and it does take practice. It is not magic. There isn't really any kind of magic to it. It really is the repetition of practicing it, and a dedication to it. You know, if you don't think it's important, it won't be. So I think that's what it's taken me all these years, is to really buy into it and really feel like, yes, this is important, because 5 years ago it was a survival technique. You know, I really, really needed it. I found that I was holding my breath, and often people in grief do that without even knowing. And all of a sudden it's like, what's happening? What's happening? I'm panicking. Oh yeah, I'm holding my breath. I need oxygen. So even just that, noticing, oh, I can, and again, coming back to what you have control over. You don't have complete control of the breath, because the lungs and the heart do all of that, but you do have the power of noticing and lengthening it or shortening it. And so the mind is actually pretty powerful over something that's already regulated. You know, your heart is regulating it already. But for you to be able to talk to your heart, your mind, to talk to your heart and say, okay, breathe, beat slower. You're going to get less oxygen in the next 10 minutes. So just bear with it, and you can do it, heart. You know, but again, now repeating, it takes a dedication though, and to really believe it's valuable. And so it actually took me something very, very tragic to believe it, to really believe that this is a powerful tool and a method of survival, and that all humans have it. You know, when you talk about accessibility, we all have this tool. So I think that's pretty powerful.
And just before we get going, was there anything else you wanted to share in terms of resources? Or
yeah, I just wanted to show one other book. It's called Emotional Alchemy, and the author is Tara Bennett Goldman. And this book I have found a lot of solace in it, because as an academic, I sometimes overuse my mind. And, you know, often with meditation we hear, or mindfulness, we hear, oh, get out of the mind, just use your heart. But that's difficult. It is a process. And what she talks about is how the mind can heal the heart. And the mind is actually very important. And so that we shouldn't discount it. And so again, just going back to holistic education, it's all important. And anytime you discount or say, oh, that's not as important, or that's not, you're really setting in path a movement of ideologies, practices, you know, who you are, your identity. And so if you're able to you know, being able to look at things in a whole as equally important, like, oh, I do need my mind. And it can help me, instead of saying, oh, I need to escape it. And so again, not being absolute and extremes. But one last thing about this is that people in grief really are I shouldn't say all people, but research shows, you know, that emotions are very heightened and can be excessive, a lot of emotional display and feeling, and same with me. And so so what this is really is about observing your emotions. So you do feel them, right? Of course, experience is very, very important to fully feel them, but then being able to observe and release. And so that's kind of the idea, is that we're transmuting emotions that aren't serving us and are bringing us suffering, and being able to change the vibrations to something that is more healing than keeping us in that suffering.
Right. Thank you, Megan. It was wonderful speaking with you, and I so appreciate your time and all of your energy, and truly the explanations and descriptions that you give to provide us with really valuable tools to kind of move through some of those spaces that are difficult and challenging. So thank you so much. And I really appreciate you, and I appreciate everything that you shared with us today.
Well, thank you for having me again as a guest, and just to have this exchange, this, even though it's screens, just being in your presence and having this conversation has already helped me heal. So thank you.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.